These are 5 times someone thought they could hide an affair. But the truth came out in ways they never expected. And the last story is the one that ended an engagement overnight. Story 1, shared car. This one happened to a friend of mine while she was still living with her boyfriend. At the time, she didn't suspect anything was wrong. They had been together for almost 3 years, shared an apartment, and were already talking about getting engaged. So when he asked to borrow her car one afternoon, it didn't seem strange at all. His car had supposedly broken down at work, and he said he needed to run a few errands after his shift. She handed him the keys and didn't think about it again. He brought the car back late that evening. He looked tired, said it had been a long day, and went straight to the shower. Everything seemed normal. Until the next morning. She got into the car to drive to work, started the engine, and immediately noticed something unusual. Her phone didn't connect to the Bluetooth system. Normally, it paired automatically the moment the car started. But this time another device connected first. A name popped up on the screen she had never seen before. At first she assumed it might belong to one of his co-workers. Maybe someone he gave a ride to during the day. But then something else appeared on the screen. The car showed the last device that had connected. And underneath the name was the contact label. Baby, that definitely wasn't her name. She sat there for a moment trying to convince herself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe it was an old device stored in the system. Maybe it belonged to someone who used the car months ago. But curiosity got the better of her. So she opened the call history on the display. And suddenly the situation looked very different. Because every recent call connected to the system had been with that same contact. Multiple calls. All from the previous afternoon. Which was the exact time her boyfriend said he had been alone running errands. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she checked something else. The navigation history. And the last destination saved from the day before wasn't anywhere near the places he claimed he went. It was a hotel across town. At that point, the story about errands didn't make much sense anymore. But instead of confronting him immediately, she decided to wait. Because now she wanted to see what he would say. So that evening she casually asked him how his day had gone. He repeated the same story. Work, a few errands. Nothing interesting. That's when she turned her phone around and showed him the photos of the Bluetooth screen from her car. And the name that popped up there. For the first time in 3 years. He didn't have anything to say. But the next story is worse. Because this one didn't start with suspicion. It started with a surprise. Story 2, the Reservation. This happened to a woman I used to work with. She had been married for almost 5 years. And by most people's standards, their relationship looked stable. They owned a small house together. They had routines. Dinner most nights. Movie nights on weekends. Nothing about their life looked unusual. But about 6 months earlier, something slowly started changing. Her husband began staying late at work more often. At first she didn't question it. He worked in sales and client dinners were part of the job. But the pattern became more noticeable. Late meetings 3 nights a week. Weekend client drinks. Random last-minute dinners he only mentioned an hour beforehand. Every time she asked about it, he gave the same answer. Work was just busy. She wanted to believe him. And for a while she did. Until one evening when he told her he had an important dinner with a client. He said it was a major deal the company had been negotiating for weeks. Apparently they were celebrating closing the contract. The meeting was at a restaurant downtown. Ironically, it was the same restaurant he had taken her to on their anniversary the year before. At first she stayed home. But after about half an hour she had an idea. She thought it might actually be a nice gesture to surprise him. Maybe stop by, say hello, and send dessert to the table for the client. So she called the restaurant. When the host answered, she politely asked if her husband had arrived yet. The host asked for the reservation name. She gave it to him. There was a pause while he checked the system. Then he said something that immediately confused her. Yes, he's here, but the reservation is for 2 people. She explained that he was supposed to be meeting clients. The host sounded uncertain, because according to the reservation notes, it wasn't a business dinner. It was marked as a special occasion. For a couple. At that point, she didn't know what to think. So instead of asking more questions, she decided to drive there herself. The restaurant wasn't far away. When she arrived, the host recognized the name immediately. He quietly pointed toward a table near the window. And that's when she saw him. Her husband was sitting across from another woman. The 2 of them leaning close together, laughing like they had known each other forever. But the detail that made everything obvious was sitting right between them. A dessert plate. A candle. And written in chocolate across the plate were 3 simple words. Happy anniversary. And when her husband finally looked up and saw her standing there, his smile disappeared immediately. He pushed his chair back like he was about to stand up and explain. But by that point she already knew there was nothing left to explain. The lie had already said everything for him. But the third story didn't start with suspicion. It started with a message that appeared out of nowhere. Story 3, the screenshot. One afternoon a woman I knew received a message from a number she didn't recognize. At first she assumed it was spam. The message didn't contain any text. Just a screenshot. When she opened the image, she immediately recognized the contact name at the top. It was her boyfriend. The screenshot showed a conversation between him and another woman. And the messages were clearly not innocent. They were flirting, making plans, talking like they had already been seeing each other for a while. For a moment she wondered if the screenshot could be fake. Maybe someone edited the image. Maybe it was an old conversation from years ago. But then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The timestamp. Because the conversation had happened the night before. At the exact time her boyfriend told her he was working late. She stared at the image trying to process it. Because if the screenshot was real, it meant something much worse. A few seconds later another message appeared from the same number. I didn't know he had a girlfriend. Then another message followed. I thought you should see this. At that point she finally replied. How long have you been talking to him? The typing bubble appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally the reply came through. About 4 months. 4 months. Which meant their entire relationship had been happening at the same time. She asked another question. Does he know you're messaging me? There was a pause. Then the typing bubble appeared again. No. Another message came through right after. He told me he was single. At that point she started scrolling through the screenshot again, reading the conversation more carefully. And the more she read, the worse it became. Because the messages didn't just show flirting. They showed plans. Weekend trips. Dinner reservations. Plans that overlapped with nights he had already spent with her. That's when she realized something important. The person sending the screenshot wasn't trying to cause drama. They had just discovered the truth themselves. And they were warning the only other person who had been lied to. About 10 minutes later, her boyfriend walked into the apartment. He greeted her like nothing was wrong. He even started talking about his day. But she was still sitting on the couch holding her phone. When he noticed the expression on her face, he paused. Then he saw the screen. The screenshot was still open. For a moment, neither of them said anything. He looked at the phone, then back at her. And the way his expression changed told her everything she needed to know. Because instead of asking what the screenshot was, he immediately started trying to explain. And that was the moment she knew the message had been real all along. But the fourth story didn't start with a message or a phone call. It started at a party where everyone thought they were celebrating something happy. Story 4, the engagement party. This happened to a woman a friend of mine worked with. She had been dating her boyfriend for almost 4 years. Long enough that most of their friends assumed a proposal was coming eventually. So when he announced he was hosting a party at his apartment, nobody questioned it. He told everyone it was just a small celebration with friends. Something casual. When she arrived that evening, the place was already full. Music playing. Drinks on the kitchen counter. People laughing and talking like it was any normal weekend party. For the first hour, nothing seemed unusual. They talked with friends. People kept joking that the party felt suspiciously like an engagement party. She laughed it off. But eventually her boyfriend asked everyone to gather in the living room. He tapped a glass to get people's attention. At first she assumed he was just making a toast. But then he started talking about their relationship. About how long they had been together. People in the room started smiling. Some of their friends were already whispering. Because it sounded exactly like the beginning of a proposal speech. Then he reached into his pocket. And pulled out a small ring box. Someone pulled out their phone to record. He walked toward her slowly while continuing his speech. Talking about trust. Talking about commitment. Talking about honesty. That last word made her pause for a second. Because the way he said it sounded different. Then instead of opening the ring box, he turned toward the crowd. And said something nobody expected. I think honesty is the most important part of a relationship. The room slowly became quiet. Then he continued speaking. So before I open this, there's something everyone here should probably know. At first people thought it was a joke. But then he pulled out his phone. A moment later the TV in the room turned on. And a set of messages appeared on the screen. The messages were between him and another woman. Flirting. Late night conversations. Plans for hotel rooms and trips. trips that overlapped with weekends he had already spent with his girlfriend. The entire room stared at the screen in silence. Some people looked confused. Others looked shocked, because the messages made it very clear what had been happening. She stood there frozen while everyone read the screen. Then someone quietly asked if the messages were real. Her boyfriend didn't even look away. He simply nodded. Then he opened the ring box. But instead of getting down on one knee, he closed it again. He looked around the room at all their friends watching. Then he said one final sentence. "I was planning to propose tonight." Then he looked directly at her. "But I figured everyone deserved to know the truth first." But the final story didn't start with a message or a party. It started in a hospital room where someone thought they were about to hear good news. Story 5. The DNA test. This happened to a woman who had been married for almost 6 years. For most of that time she believed their relationship was stable. They had a house together, shared finances, plans to start a family. But during the final year of their marriage, something began to feel different. Her husband started acting distant. He spent more time away from home. Late nights at work became more common. At first she tried to ignore it. Every relationship goes through difficult periods. But eventually she noticed something else. He had started becoming strangely nervous whenever the topic of children came up, which was confusing, because he had always been the one pushing for them to start a family. One evening after dinner he brought up something unexpected. He said he wanted them both to take a medical test before trying for children, just to make sure everything was healthy. At first she didn't see a problem with it. Doctors often recommend fertility tests. So a few weeks later they went to the hospital together. The appointment was simple. Just a few tests and some paperwork. The doctor told them the results would come back within a few days. When the day finally arrived, they both went back to the clinic. They sat together in a small office waiting for the doctor to explain the results. At first the doctor spoke normally, talking about general health, explaining how the tests work. Then he paused for a moment while reading the file. His expression changed slightly. He looked back at them and said something unexpected. "There seems to be a mistake in the information we were given." Both of them looked confused. The doctor continued speaking. "These results show that the patient has actually been pregnant before." The room went quiet, because according to the medical records, the pregnancy had happened almost 2 years earlier. The doctor assumed they already knew. But the woman sitting in the chair slowly turned toward her husband, because she had never been pregnant. Not once. Which meant there was only one explanation left. The pregnancy in the file didn't belong to her. It belonged to someone else. And judging by the date in the report, it had happened while they were already married. For a moment nobody said anything. Then her husband finally tried to speak. But the look on his face had already said everything. Because in that moment she realized something painful. The test he insisted on taking hadn't been about starting a family. It had been about hiding one. And if you enjoy these kinds of real stories where the truth eventually comes out, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There are plenty more stories just like this on the channel.